So we're continuing with our circle graph. We've just drawn our sleep sector. Now we're going to draw our school sector. So with my school sector, I'm going to take my protractor. This time I'm going to align with this line that I just drew so that I can do my next sector of 104 degrees. So 104 was, again, I start at 0, 100, and 104 is right here. I can move my protractor off, draw my line that goes from the center of the circle to this point here, and then I could color that section in. So if I go to color that section in, and then I identify that as my school time. The next sector that was on our chart was her job. So her job is 61 degrees. So again, I take my protractor and I'm going to spin it so that it lines up again here, and then I'm going to draw a 61 degree angle. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 61. Move my protractor off, not bigger. There we go. Draw my line, center of my circle to that 61, and then I will have to color it in. So I would choose a different color, and I'll be able to choose that color in just a minute. So I'm going to fill this in with the green. Then I can pick blue. So there's my blue color. And that was her job. After 61 degrees, after her job, comes her homework, which was 22 degrees. So again, 22 degrees puts me right 10, 20, there's 22. So my line again. And then I'm going to color it in. Change my color. Pink. So there's my job. So then again, I would have to make sure that that's homework. Oops. Move this out of the way so I can write in homework. And then I'm going to do the rest of them, my 32, 22, and the 14. We start off with my 32 degrees. So 30, 32. And then again, I color it in. Red. And that one was my meals. And then again, I have my 22 degrees. I'm going to color it in. I think this time I'm going to use a thinner marker. Let's see, what could I pick? I could pick teal. And that was for relaxation. And then the final section that I have left would be the travel. So I could color that one in. And again, I'm going to change the color of it. Purple. And that's my travel. And there's my circle graph. The only other thing that I need to do is I would want to put a title at the top of my circle graph. So my title this time would be, could be percent of day spent on activities. And then I could write those percentages in that I calculated from up top. So 29% was sleep, 29% on school, 17% was spent on her job, 6% on homework, 9% on meals, another 6% on relaxation, and then 4% on her job. So these numbers here, I could put them outside the sectors just so that they're easier to see, because they are a little bit harder to see on the sector that it is. But that is basically how you would put, or how you would draw a circle graph. So let's look at class example number 2, where a circle graph is drawn for you, and we're going to use the circle graph to answer questions. So Rochelle's an environmental monitor who gathers water samples from different rivers. The samples are tested for various pollutants, and the graph below represents the percentage of rivers that contain a certain level of nitrogen, which is often associated with fertilizer and animal waste. Nitrogen is measured in milligrams per liter. So if we look at this circle graph, what is the most common nitrogen level? Well, that's the largest sector of the circle, which is this right here in red, which is my 0.6.08. So 0.6 to 0.8 of a milligram per liter. The least common nitrogen level, my 13%, my 1.1 to 1.2. And it says, what else would you need to know to determine the number of rivers at each of the different nitrogen levels? So what I would want to know is I'd want to know how many rivers were tested. Like if there's only 5 rivers tested, that's a lot different than it was there 50 or 60. And D says, what might be misleading about this graph? Well, it could be misleading because my nitrogen levels don't actually form a range. This goes from 0 to 5/10, 6/10 to 8/10. That's only 3. This is 5. This is 2. This one is like 2 again, 1.1 to 1.2. And this one is 2. So the misleading part about this graph is that my legend isn't very consistent, or my sectors, my nitrogen levels being tested are not consistent. If I want to look at the discuss the ideas, which is on the top of page 103, Max is a freshwater angling guide who works for an outdoor company in northern Alberta. So at the end of the month, Max's employer Ben requests that he submit his receipts for his monthly graph or monthly expenses, as well as a circle graph displaying how he spent it. Why would Ben want him to put this as a circle graph? So think of some reasons. Personally, the reason why Ben would want to see it is because it's visual. He can very easily look at that graph and he can see which sectors are bigger than others, rather than pouring through all of the different amounts. It also forces Max to do calculations. He's going to have to add up all of his expenses, and he has to categorize them. Which expenses had to do with perhaps lodging? Which expenses had to do with his meals? Which expenses had to do with the mileage or the travel on his vehicle or repair? So then from there, Ben can identify if Max is overspending in one area or another. That was a big question I wanted to look at that one. And the last one that I want to look at is just on page 104, the math, the mental math. Talks about the 4 species of marmots that are in Canada, one of which is on Vancouver Island. There's about 100 Vancouver Island marmots in the whole world, with very few living in the wild. So these are 2 graphs, one in 1979 and one in 1998 of adult versus juvenile. So if we were to look at the 2 questions associated, in 1998, about what percentage of the Vancouver Island marmot population was composed of adults? This graph doesn't have any percentages this time, so how could we determine that answer for ourselves? Well, we go back to dividing a circle. If I divide a circle in half, what percentage is on each side? 50%. Then if I look at this, if I divide it in half again, and if I divide it in half again, what have I done? Well, each of these sections here represents 25%, and I've cut this into another 25, and then cut it further in half into 12 and a half. So I have 50 and another 12 and a half. I have about 62.5% of the marmot population is adults. So in the second question, how much the percentage of adults has decreased between 1979 and 1998? Well, again, if I take my lines, straight down the middle I know is 50%. If I go across the middle again, and then here what I can try to figure out is how much did I cut this by? So if I look at it, I cut it in half, I cut it in half again. So each of these is a quarter of my 25. A quarter of my 25 is about 6. So I have all of this, which was 50, another 25 there, and another 6. Altogether gives me about 81%. The difference between the two, between 81 and 62.5, about 20%. So the adult population has decreased by 20%, which isn't a bad thing because that means that they're having more babies. Juveniles means there's more babies, so it helps the population get larger. So your questions, the build your skills that I want you to start working on, which start on page 104, is questions number, gotta find it in my book, questions 1 to 6. So on the questions where you have to draw your own circle graph, you're going to have to do those calculations like we did in example number 1. I want to see what the percentages were, and I want to see what the sector, the degrees of your circle graph are. And then we'll discuss those when I come back to class tomorrow. See you later.